Love should make you braver, not smaller. And that night on the porch, I finally had to choose between my parents' approval and my family's dignity.
They threw out his black wife and newborn twins until her secret billionaire father pulled up in a Rolls-Royce to collect his grandbabies. They threw my wife Raven and our 2-day-old twins out onto that cold February porch like we were nothing more than garbage to be disposed of. The hospital bracelet was still wrapped around Raven's wrist, her body shaking from the C-section pain as she held our babies against her chest, their cries cutting through the bitter night air while my parents stood in the doorway with faces carved from stone. Before I go any further, I need to thank every one of you who helped Mr. Steele Rich Stories pass 2,500 subscribers. Your support is what allows me to tell these raw, real stories about families torn apart by prejudice and brought together by unexpected love. Please share this video right now if you believe everyone deserves to hear stories about courage in the face of family betrayal, about choosing love over comfort, and about the surprising places salvation can come from when you're at your absolute lowest. Hit that like button if this opening already has you feeling something deep in your chest. Drop a comment if you've ever felt thrown away by the very people who were supposed to protect you. Subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories and turn on those notifications, because these aren't just stories, they're lessons wrapped in real human experience. And I promise you've never heard anything quite like what I'm about to tell you. Have you ever felt like the people who raised you, who claimed to love you unconditionally, suddenly looked at you like you were a stranger? Have you ever had to choose between your parents' approval and the person who makes your heart feel whole? That's exactly where I stood that night, watching my mother Ida's lips curl with disgust as she looked at my wife and our newborn babies. "Take them and leave," Ida said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Tonight, don't come back." My father Clint stood behind her, his silence more damning than any words could have been. These were the people who taught me about family values, who preached about Christian charity every Sunday, who claimed they wanted what was best for me. Yet here they were, casting out their own son because I'd married a woman they deemed unacceptable, because I'd created beautiful babies who didn't fit their narrow vision of what family should look like. Raven could barely stand. She'd had an emergency C-section just 48 hours earlier. The doctors had wanted to keep her another day, but she'd insisted on coming home because she thought, God, we both thought, that seeing their grandchildren would soften my parents' hearts. Instead, we'd walked into an ambush of cold rejection. I'll never forget the shame that burned through me as I helped Raven down those porch steps, each movement causing her to wince, our babies crying because they could sense their mother's pain. I'd brought her here. I'd convinced her that my parents would come around once they saw our children. I'd been so catastrophically wrong it physically hurt. But just when I thought we were completely alone in this world, when I was calculating how far we could drive before Raven needed serious rest, when the weight of having no home and 2 newborns was crushing my chest, that's when we heard it. The smooth purr of an engine that didn't belong in my parents' middle-class neighborhood. A sound that spoke of money, real money, the kind that changes everything it touches. A black Rolls-Royce glided up the driveway like it had been summoned from another world entirely. The door opened, and out stepped a tall man in a suit that probably cost more than my parents' mortgage. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never had to ask permission for anything in his life. His eyes found Raven first, then the babies, then finally landed on me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I came for my grandbabies," Maxwell Cross said, his voice carrying the authority of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. "And my daughter." That's when everything I thought I knew about my wife, about her past, about why she'd been so reluctant to talk about her family, suddenly made sense. But to understand how we ended up on that porch with a billionaire grandfather appearing like some kind of guardian angel, you need to know how this all really started. My name is Talon Croswell, and I grew up in the kind of small Ohio town where everyone knows your business before you do. My parents owned a hardware store on Main Street, sponsored Little League teams, and hosted 4th of July barbecues that half the neighborhood attended. We were respectable people, good people, or at least that's what I believed for the first 26 years of my life. I never thought my parents were the type to care about superficial differences between people. They hired employees from all backgrounds at the store, nodded politely to all customers, even donated to various community causes when needs arose. But there's a difference between tolerance at a distance and acceptance up close, between being polite to strangers and welcoming someone into your bloodline who doesn't match your expectations. The day I met Raven Cross, none of that mattered yet. I was working my evening shift in campus maintenance at Riverside Community College, the kind of job nobody notices unless something's broken. Most nights I'd spend hours after classes ended fixing squeaky doors, replacing burnt-out lights, and patching up the small damages that accumulate when hundreds of students move through a building every day. It was a Thursday evening in September, around 8 o'clock, when I got a work order for the library's 3rd floor. Someone had reported a door that wouldn't close properly, constantly swinging and banging against its frame. I found the problem door in the back corner of the reference section behind a long table covered in accounting textbooks, highlighters and loose papers. A woman sat there alone, so focused on her studying that she didn't even look up when I approached with my toolbox. She'd built a fortress of books around herself, 3 coffee cups at various stages of empty scattered among the pages. Her concentration was absolute, the kind of focus that suggested education wasn't just a path for her but a lifeline. She held up one finger without looking at me, finished whatever calculation she was working on, then finally glanced up. Her eyes were striking, intelligent, carrying both determination and exhaustion in equal measure. "That door's been banging its head against that frame for 2 hours," she said. I was starting to relate to it. I laughed despite myself. "Sounds like you both need some help then. The door definitely does. I'm beyond help at this point." She gestured at the textbooks surrounding her. "Intermediate accounting waits for no one." I started working on the door, tightening the hinges and adjusting the frame. Accounting major, and working 2 jobs to pay for it, which is why I'm here at 8 o'clock on a Thursday night, instead of doing literally anything fun. She paused. "Not that I'm complaining. Education is a privilege. I'm just tired." Something about her honesty, the way she acknowledged both gratitude and struggle without making it dramatic, pulled at something in my chest. I finished with the door and tested it. Smooth, silent, perfect. "There you go. No more banging, thank you." She smiled genuinely. "I'm Raven, by the way. Raven Cross. Talon Croswell. That should have been the end of it. A brief encounter with a hard-working student in the library, but 3 days later I walked into the campus cafe during my lunch break, and there she was behind the counter, wearing a green apron and taking someone's order with the same focused intensity she'd had while studying. When it was my turn, she looked at me with recognition flickering across her face. "Library door guy," she said. "Let me guess. You're following me now." "I'm just trying to get a sandwich," I said, unable to stop the smile spreading across my face. "Though if I were following you, I'd be terrible at it since you spotted me immediately." "Turkey or ham?" "Turkey." She started making my sandwich with quick, efficient movements. "So do you fix things and eat, or do you actually take classes here?" "Both. Business management major. You, accounting. Also working 2 jobs to pay for it, which is why you'll probably see me in 4 different places around campus. Just so you know I'm not following you either." "Noted," I said, handing her exact change. "Though I wouldn't mind running into you again." She handed me the sandwich, and for just a moment, our fingers touched. The library's usually quiet after 9. If you ever need a place to study, I might take you up on that. Over the following weeks, those accidental encounters became something more intentional. I'd find reasons to be in the library during her study sessions. She'd time her cafe breaks to when I usually came in for lunch. We started sitting together at adjacent tables, our textbooks spread out between us, occasionally helping each other with concepts we understood better than the other. I learned that her mother Angela had passed away the previous year, an illness that had progressed too quickly, taking her before Raven could fully process what was happening. Raven spoke about her with this mixture of love and grief that I understood instinctively, honoring her memory while still being angry at the unfairness of losing her so young. She worked so hard to give me opportunities, Raven explained one evening when we ended up being the last 2 people in the library. Multiple jobs, night shifts, everything. She taught me that education was freedom, that knowledge was something nobody could take away from you once you had it. She sounds remarkable, I said quietly. She was, and she was alone in it. My father wasn't in the picture, never met him, never got his name, just knew he existed somewhere out there living his life without us. There was no self-pity in her voice, just a statement of fact. But I could hear the old wound underneath, the kind that scabs over but never fully heals. I told her about the hardware store, about going home every weekend to help my parents with inventory and repairs, even though I was trying to build a life beyond Millbrook. About how my father still treated me like I was 16, timing my breaks and questioning my choices. She learned that I had a secret love for old soul music, particularly the cheesy love songs from the 70s that my mother used to play while cooking Sunday dinners. That I felt like I was living inside a box someone else had built, following a script written before I was born. Do you ever feel like you're living a life someone else already chose for you? She asked one cold October night at the bus stop outside the science building. Rain fell in sheets, and the bus was running 40 minutes late, according to the app on my phone. The question hit me in the chest. Every single day, I admitted. My dad has my whole future mapped out. Take over the store, marry someone from town, have kids who'll eventually take over from me. Sometimes I feel like I'm supposed to be grateful for the certainty, but mostly it just feels suffocating. She nodded slowly, and in the glow of the streetlight, I saw something vulnerable cross her face. My mom loved someone once, Raven said quietly. A man from a completely different world than ours. His family didn't approve of her, thought she wasn't good enough for their standards, and eventually he convinced himself that leaving her was somehow protecting her. Like his love wasn't strong enough to stand up to what other people thought. What happened? She raised me alone, worked herself to exhaustion, trying to give me opportunities. And she taught me that love should never make you smaller. That if someone really loves you, they don't hide you or leave you, or let their family treat you like you're disposable. Raven turned to look at me directly then, and I felt the weight of some test I didn't fully understand. This man from another world, I said carefully. Where is he now? Somewhere comfortable, I assume. Living the life his family wanted for him. Building whatever empire they decided was more important than the woman who loved him and the daughter he never met. Her voice carried no self-pity, just a hard edge of fact. He never met you? Not even once? Not once. My mom said he wanted to, kept sending letters and money that she sent back. But she had this rule. You don't get to be a part-time parent when it's convenient. You're either all in or you're out. He chose out. Or his family chose for him, which amounts to the same thing. The bus finally appeared in the distance, its headlights cutting through the rain. If I ever fall in love, I heard myself saying, surprised by the fierceness in my own voice. I'm not letting my parents or anybody else run that person off. Love should make you braver, not smaller. Your mom was right about that. Raven studied my face for a long moment as the bus pulled up, something skeptical but hopeful flickering in her eyes. We'll see, she said quietly, stepping onto the bus ahead of me. I didn't know it then, but those two words were both a challenge and an invitation. A dare to prove that I was different from the man who'd abandoned her mother. Different from the expectations and prejudices that had shaped my upbringing. I spent the weeks after that bus stop conversation thinking about Raven's words, about bravery and love and the kind of man I wanted to be. But to understand why those conversations mattered so much, you need to know where I came from. I grew up in Millbrook, Ohio, population 3,847, where the most exciting thing that happened most weeks was when somebody's cow got loose on Route 40. My parents, Clint and Ida, owned Croswell Hardware on Main Street, right between Betty's Diner and the First Baptist Church. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable in that solid middle-class way that small-town business owners can be. Every Sunday morning meant church in our best clothes, my father's hand heavy on my shoulder as we walked through doors, where our family had sat in the same pew for 3 generations. Summer evenings brought neighborhood cookouts, where my mother's potato salad was always the first dish to empty out. Fall meant high school football games where everyone knew everyone's stats and family histories going back decades. Our neighbors borrowed tools from the shop without asking because that's just what you did in Millbrook. Mrs. Henderson would drop off casseroles when someone was sick. Mr. Wallace would plow driveways after snowstorms without expecting payment. On the surface, it looked like the kind of warm, tight-knit community that people write nostalgic songs about. And for a long time, I believed that's exactly what it was. A good place full of good people living good lives. The cracks in that belief started small, the way they always do when you're a kid trying to make sense of adult contradictions. Thanksgiving dinners at my Uncle Raymond's house always followed the same pattern. The men would gather in the living room after eating, loosening their belts and turning on whatever game was playing. And somewhere between the second and third beer, the comments would start. Complaints about welfare and handouts, jokes that made certain people the punchline without naming them directly, observations about who belonged in the neighborhood and who didn't. My father never made the comments himself, but he never stopped them either. He'd just sip his beer and watch the game like he hadn't heard anything. I remember when the Johnsons, a family from Cincinnati, rented the Patterson house 2 streets over from ours. I was 11 years old, and I watched the way conversations stopped at the hardware store when Mrs. Johnson came in looking for paint samples. The way smiles got tight and polite instead of genuine. The way my mother started locking our car doors even though we'd never locked them before in our lives. "Mom, why do we lock the doors now?" I asked one evening. "Just being careful, honey," she replied, her eyes fixed on the road. "That's just how the world is." That phrase became her answer to everything I questioned. Any time something felt wrong, any time I noticed the gap between what we said at church and how we actually lived. That's just how the world is. By the time I graduated high school, the script for my life had already been written by everyone except me. I'd work full-time at the hardware store, eventually take it over, when my father's back finally gave out, marry a nice local girl from a family everyone knew, and raise my kids in the same house I grew up in. The thought of that predictable path made me feel like I was suffocating under a blanket I couldn't quite pull off my face. "Are you thinking about college?" my guidance counselor asked during senior year. "Maybe community college," I said carefully, knowing my parents considered 4-year universities a waste of money for someone who already had a job waiting. My father's response was exactly what I expected. "College for what? So you can spend $40,000 to learn what I can teach you for free? The shop's doing fine, Talon. This family built something real here." "I know, Dad. I just want to learn some things first. Business management, maybe accounting. It could help the shop." I framed it that way because it was the only argument that might work. Not that I wanted to see what else existed beyond Millbrook's town limits. Not that I felt suffocated by everyone knowing exactly who I was and who I'd always be. Not that I wanted to understand how the world is felt increasingly wrong the older I got. Just that it might help the family business. Safe, practical, acceptable. He grudgingly agreed to community college in the city 30 miles away. That Thursday evening in the library wasn't just a random work assignment. It was the beginning of everything that would eventually lead to that porch, those babies, and that Rolls Royce. I'd been working campus maintenance for 3 months by then, taking evening shifts that paid slightly more and allowed me to attend morning classes. The work was simple but satisfying, fixing things that were broken, making spaces more functional, contributing in a tangible way. When the work order came through for a malfunctioning door on the library's 3rd floor, I grabbed my toolbox and headed up, expecting a quick 15-minute fix. The door was in the back corner of the reference section, in that quiet area where serious students camped out during exam weeks. The woman sitting at the table behind the broken door had built what I can only describe as a study fortress. Textbooks stacked strategically, papers organized in precise piles, 3 coffee cups in various stages of consumption, and a focus so intense she didn't even register my presence at first. When I finally got her attention and explained I needed to fix the door, she looked up with eyes that were both exhausted and determined. That combination, tired but refusing to quit, was the first thing that drew me to Raven Cross. "That door's been banging its head against that frame for 2 hours," she said. I was starting to relate to it. Her sense of humor despite obvious stress made me smile. "Sounds like you both need some help then." We talked while I worked, just small exchanges about classes and stress, and the shared experience of being students who work to pay for education rather than having it handed to us. Nothing profound, nothing that would predict the future we'd build together. But when I said goodbye and she told me her name, Raven Cross, something in my chest recognized something in hers. Like we were both carrying similar weights, but hadn't met anyone else who understood what that felt like. 3 days passed before I saw her again, and in that time, I'd thought about her more than I wanted to admit. Not in an obsessive way, but in that gentle, persistent way, where someone's smile or turn of phrase keeps surfacing in your mind at random moments. I walked into the campus cafe during my lunch break on Monday, hungry and thinking about the economics assignment I needed to finish before my evening shift. The cafe was crowded with the usual lunch rush, students lined up 6 deep waiting to order. And there behind the counter, wearing a green apron and moving with efficient precision, was Raven. When my turn came, recognition lit up her face immediately. "Library door guy," she said with a slight smile. "Let me guess, you're following me now." "I'm just trying to get a sandwich," I replied, feeling my own smile spread across my face. "Though if I were following you, I'd be terrible at it, since you spotted me immediately." "Turkey or ham?" "Turkey." She started assembling my sandwich with practiced speed, her hands quick and sure. "So do you fix things and eat, or do you actually take classes here?" "Both. Business management major. You, accounting. Also working 2 jobs to pay for it, which is why you'll probably see me in 4 different places around campus. Just so you know I'm not following you either." "Noted," I said, "though I wouldn't mind running into you again." She handed me the sandwich, and our fingers touched briefly. The library's usually quiet after 9. If you ever need a place to study. After that cafe encounter, Raven Cross started appearing in my world with increasing frequency, though whether by design or coincidence I couldn't quite determine. I'd see her in the hallway between classes, always moving with purpose, her backpack loaded down with textbooks that looked heavy enough to cause permanent damage. At the bus stop on rainy evenings, sheltering under the overhang with homework balanced on her knees. Back at the library during my maintenance rounds, still building fortresses out of accounting materials. Each encounter gave me another small piece of who she was, Her mother, Angela, had died the previous year from an illness that progressed faster than anyone expected. Raven spoke about her with this mixture of love and anger that I understood instinctively, mad at the universe for taking her too soon, but grateful for every sacrifice that had made Raven's education possible. "I'm studying accounting because numbers don't lie unless people tell them to," she explained one evening when we ended up at adjacent tables in the library. "My mom got cheated out of paychecks by employers who knew she couldn't afford to push back. I want to be the person who makes sure that doesn't happen to other people." I told her about the hardware store, about going home every weekend to help my parents with inventory and repairs even though I was trying to build something beyond their expectations, about how my father still timed my lunch breaks even though I was 23 years old. She learned that I had a secret love for old soul music, particularly the cheesy love songs from the 70s that my mother used to play while cooking Sunday dinners, that I felt like I was living inside a box someone else had built, following a script I never agreed to perform. The conversation that changed everything happened on a cold October night at the bus stop outside the science building. Rain fell in sheets, and the bus was running 40 minutes late, according to the app on my phone. Raven stood under the small shelter, her accounting textbook protected inside her jacket, both of us watching headlights pass that belonged to every vehicle except the bus we needed. "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly, her breath misting in the cold air. "Sure. Do you ever feel like you're living a life someone else already chose for you? Like you're just following a script that got written before you were even born?" The question hit me in the chest because I'd been feeling exactly that for years, but had never articulated it so clearly. Every single day, I admitted. My dad has my whole future mapped out. Take over the shop, marry someone from town, have kids who will eventually take over from me. Sometimes I feel like I'm supposed to be grateful for the certainty, but mostly it just feels like a cage made out of other people's expectations. She nodded slowly, and in the glow of the streetlight, I saw something vulnerable cross her face. "My mom loved someone once," Raven said quietly. "A man from a completely different world than ours. His family didn't approve of her, thought she wasn't good enough for their standards, and eventually he convinced himself that leaving her was somehow protecting her. Like his love wasn't strong enough to stand up to what other people thought. What happened? She raised me alone, worked herself to exhaustion trying to give me opportunities, and she taught me that love should never make you smaller." Raven turned to look at me directly then, and I felt the weight of some test I didn't fully understand. "This man from another world," I said carefully. "Where is he now?" "Somewhere rich and comfortable, I assume, living the life his family wanted for him, building whatever empire they decided was more important than the woman who loved him and the daughter he never met." Her voice carried no self-pity, just a hard edge of fact that suggested she'd made peace with his absence long ago. "He never met you? Not even once?" "Not once. My mom said he wanted to, kept sending letters and money that she sent back. But she had this rule. You don't get to be a part-time parent when it's convenient. You're either all in or you're out." He chose out. Or his family chose for him, which amounts to the same thing. The bus finally appeared in the distance, its headlights cutting through the rain like deliverance from an uncomfortable conversation. "If I ever fall in love," I heard myself saying, surprised by the fierceness in my own voice, "I'm not letting my parents or anybody else run that person off. Love should make you braver, not smaller. Your mom was right about that." Raven studied my face for a long moment as the bus pulled up, something skeptical but hopeful flickering in her eyes, like she wanted to believe me but had learned through hard experience that words were easy and follow-through was rare. "We'll see," she said quietly, stepping onto the bus ahead of me. Those two words, "we'll see," were both a challenge and an invitation. A test I would eventually face on a cold porch with newborn babies crying and everything I'd ever known crumbling behind me. That bus stop conversation marked a turning point neither of us acknowledged out loud. Our accidental encounters became intentional meetings. Study sessions at the library stretched into shared meals at the cheap taco place across from campus. I made her a playlist of those old soul songs I loved, and she surprised me by knowing every word to Al Green's Let's Stay Together. One Friday night in late November, after we'd both finished our shifts, I drove her to this spot I knew, a hill overlooking the city where you could see all the lights stretching out like fallen stars. We sat on the hood of my beat-up Ford truck, shoulders touching, our breath visible in the cold air. My mom used to say that every light down there is somebody's whole world, Raven said softly. Somebody's kitchen table, somebody's reading lamp, somebody staying up late worried about tomorrow. I reached for her hand without thinking, and when our fingers interlaced, it felt like the most natural thing I'd ever done. 3 weeks later, in that same spot, I kissed her for the first time. It wasn't fireworks or movie magic. It was quiet and sincere, tasting like the coffee we'd shared and feeling like a promise I intended to keep for the rest of my life. We were broke in the way young people in love often are, splitting dollar menu items and walking everywhere to save gas money, but in those winter months, we built dreams that felt richer than anything money could buy. Raven would talk about the house she wanted someday. Nothing fancy, just a small place with a porch swing where she could sit in the evenings after work. A kitchen with enough counter space to actually cook instead of the hot plate situation we were managing in our respective tiny apartments. I want a garden, she'd say, her eyes distant with longing. Tomatoes, herbs, maybe some flowers. My mom never had time for a garden, always working. I want that kind of peace. I want a dog, I'd add. Big one that takes up half the couch and thinks it's a lap dog. Kids? Definitely. 2, maybe 3. A family built on honesty instead of secrets, where our kids never have to guess if they're loved or wonder if they're good enough. She'd smile at that, squeezing my hand tighter. A family where love makes you braver, not smaller. We were dreaming in a cramped booth at a diner, surviving on hope and cheap coffee, but it felt like we were building something real. February brought a snowstorm that shut down campus for 3 days, and a moment that changed everything. Raven showed up at my apartment on a Tuesday evening, her face unreadable. She didn't say hello, didn't take off her coat. She just reached into her pocket and pulled out a white plastic stick with 2 pink lines in the result window. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice shaking. "I took 3 tests. They're all positive." The world seemed to tilt sideways. I sat down on my second-hand couch, staring at those 2 pink lines that represented an entire human being we'd created. Fear hit me first. We were barely keeping ourselves afloat financially. Then awe, the reality that Raven was carrying our child. Then something fiercer than anything I'd felt before, an overwhelming need to protect both of them. "Okay," I said, standing up and taking her hands. "Okay. We're going to figure this out. Talon, we can barely afford rent. I'm still in school. You're working part-time. I know all that. But I also know I love you, and I'm not going anywhere. Whatever we need to do, we do it together. You're not alone in this, Raven. Not for 1 second. I started picking up extra shifts anywhere I could find them. Maintenance expanded my hours. I worked weekends at a gas station near campus. Every spare dollar went into an envelope I kept hidden in my sock drawer. 3 weeks after Raven told me about the pregnancy, I walked into Palmer's pawn shop on 4th Street. The man behind the counter had a grey beard and kind eyes that had probably seen 1,000 desperate people walk through his door. "Looking for something specific?" he asked. "An engagement ring. Something simple but real. I've got $240. He studied me for a moment, then pulled out a tray of rings from the case. "This one," he said, pointing to a simple silver band with a small diamond. "It's not fancy, but it's genuine. Somebody loved somebody with this ring once. Maybe it's got another love story in it. I bought it for $230. That night, in Raven's cramped studio apartment with its leaking faucet and rattling heater, I got down on one knee beside her futon. My hands were shaking as I pulled out the small velvet box the pawnshop owner had thrown in for free. Raven Cross. I know the timing is complicated and we don't have much, but I love you. Not because of the baby, but because you make me want to be braver than I've ever been. Will you marry me?" She was crying before I even finished the question. "Yes. We got married on a Thursday afternoon in March at the county courthouse. No big white dress, no tuxedo, no family members lining the pews. Just Raven in a blue dress she'd found at Goodwill for $12, me in the best shirt I owned, and a future we were betting everything on. The clerk who performed the ceremony was a middle-aged woman named Patricia, who mispronounced Croswell as Crosswell 3 times before I stopped correcting her. Our witnesses were 2 strangers we'd pulled from the hallway. A college student waiting for a traffic court appearance, and an older gentleman there for a permit application. "Do you, Talon Croswell, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do, and do you, Raven Cross, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "Then by the power vested in me by the state of Ohio, I now pronounce you husband and wife." We kissed in that sterile government building with overhead lights humming, and despite the lack of flowers or music or celebration, the happiness was absolutely real. We walked out into the March afternoon as Mr. and Mrs. Croswell, holding hands and facing the world together. I'd called my parents the night before the courthouse ceremony, partly out of obligation, and partly because some foolish part of me still hoped they'd be happy for me. My mother Ida answered on the 3rd ring. "Talon? Why are you calling so late?" "Mom, I need to tell you something. Raven and I are getting married tomorrow." The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Tomorrow?" she finally said, her voice tight. "What's the rush, Talon? You barely know this girl." "I've known her for months, Mom, and I love her. We're starting a family together." Another silence, then her voice dropped lower. "She's pregnant." "Oh, Talon, this is a mistake. You're throwing your whole life away for a girl you met at some community college." My father's voice rumbled in the background, and I heard him take the phone. "Son, listen to me. You can't start a life of love alone. What about money? What about insurance? What about the fact that I'm happy, Dad? What about the fact that I love her?" "Love doesn't pay bills," Clint said flatly. "And you've got responsibilities now. Real responsibilities. You need to think about what you're doing." What he didn't say, what my mother didn't say directly, was right there in every pause and carefully chosen word. "She's not from here. She's not what we expected. You're making your life harder than it needs to be. Why couldn't you just follow the plan we laid out? The conversation I'd had with my mother 3 weeks earlier, right after I first told them about Raven, played on repeat in my mind. She seems different," Ida had said carefully, "the way people do when they are trying to sound open-minded while communicating exactly the opposite. Are you sure you want to complicate your life this way, Talon? People form opinions in small towns." "Opinions about what, Mom? You know what I mean. Certain situations face challenges. Your children will face questions. I'm just thinking about what's best for you. What's best for me is being with someone I love who makes me better." "Love is wonderful, honey. But practical matters count too. Does she come from a good family? What does her father do?" "Her father wasn't in the picture. Her mother passed away last year." I'd heard the judgment in my mother's silence, the assumptions forming. Single mother, absent father, working multiple jobs, all the coded language that really meant she doesn't fit our expectations, she doesn't belong in our world. I should have confronted it directly. Should have said, "Mom, what exactly are you objecting to here? Let's put it in plain words so we can deal with it honestly." Instead, I'd taken the easier path. "I love her, Mom. That's that." But that wasn't enough when the prejudice stayed unspoken, growing like mold behind walls nobody wanted to open. By late April, the reality of our situation had sharp edges we couldn't ignore. Raven was 12 weeks pregnant, exhausted from morning sickness that lasted all day, and struggling to keep up with her accounting courses. I was working 50-hour weeks between 3 different jobs, and still coming up short when rent was due. Our landlord, a man named Mr. Kowalski who smelled like cigars and disappointment, started leaving notes on our door. First polite reminders, then warnings printed in increasingly aggressive fonts. That's when my mother called with an offer wrapped in concern. "Talon, your father and I have been talking. You shouldn't be struggling in that tiny apartment when we have a perfectly good guest room here. Come home for a little while, just until the baby comes and you get on your feet." Every instinct I had screamed that this was a bad idea. But exhaustion has a way of making bad ideas look like practical solutions. "I don't know, Mom. Raven and I are managing okay. Are you? Because your father drove past your building last week, and honey, that's not a safe neighborhood for a pregnant woman. What if something happens? What if she needs help and you're at work?" The guilt landed exactly where she intended. I looked around our apartment, the lock that didn't quite catch, the heating that cut out randomly, the stairs Raven had to climb that left her winded and dizzy. "Let me talk to Raven," I said. When I presented the idea to my wife, I watched her face close off like shutters slamming down. "Your parents don't want me there, Talon. They want to help. No, they want to control. There's a difference." Let me pause the story right here because I need to ask you something directly. Have you ever accepted help that came with invisible strings attached? Have you ever known in your gut that something was a bad idea, but you did it anyway because the alternative seemed harder? Drop a comment right now and tell me about a time you chose short-term comfort over your long-term instincts. I read every single comment, and your stories matter. If you're feeling this story, if Raven and I feel real to you, hit that like button. And if you haven't subscribed to Mr. Steele Rich Stories yet, do it now, because what happens next? The months living under my parents' roof, the birth of the twins, and the night that Rolls-Royce pulled up. You don't want to miss any of it. Because here's what I didn't understand then. My mother's offer wasn't about safety or support. It was about proximity and control. It was about having us close enough to constantly remind Raven that she didn't belong, close enough to whisper doubts in my ear about whether I'd made the right choice, close enough to drive a wedge between us when we were most vulnerable. But I didn't see that yet. I just saw a way to give Raven a safer place to carry our baby, a way to save money so we could eventually get our own place that wasn't falling apart. A way to prove to my parents that Raven was exactly who I knew her to be, strong, capable, worthy of love and respect. So I convinced her. I promised I'd protect her. I promised it would only be temporary. And I moved my pregnant wife into my parents' house, where resentment would grow quietly behind closed doors. We moved into my childhood bedroom on a Saturday in May, carrying our entire life in the bed of my truck and 4 cardboard boxes. The room hadn't changed much since high school. Same faded blue walls, same creaky floorboard by the window, same view of the Hendersons' backyard next door. Except now it was crammed with baby supplies we'd been collecting. A second-hand crib took up one corner, still smelling faintly of the lemon cleaner I'd used to scrub it down. Newborn clothes in neutral yellows and greens filled plastic bins stacked against the wall. My father's old toolbox sat in the closet, because there was nowhere else to store it, the metal edges poking out like a reminder that this space wasn't really ours. Those first few days felt almost normal. My mother cooked bigger dinners than I'd seen in years: pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans from her garden. My father showed Raven the new railing he'd installed on the back porch, pointing out the craftsmanship with genuine pride. One evening, Raven helped my mother make peach cobbler, and when the filling boiled over in the oven, filling the kitchen with smoke, they both laughed until tears ran down their faces. For a moment, standing in the doorway watching them, I let myself believe this might actually work. That moment lasted exactly 11 days. The first comment came on a Sunday morning as we were getting ready for church. Raven had her hair styled in an elegant updo, wearing a modest navy dress that showed the small curve of her growing belly. She looked beautiful, professional, exactly appropriate for Sunday service. My mother knocked on our bedroom door as Raven was putting in her earrings. "You're not going to wear it like that, are you?" Raven's hands stilled. "Wear what? Like what, Mrs. Croswell?" "Your hair. It's just, people might say things. You know how folks talk. Maybe you could smooth it back or wear a scarf, something more." She waved her hand vaguely, searching for a word that wouldn't sound as judgmental as what she was actually thinking. "Traditional. My hair is traditional," Raven said quietly. "Just not your tradition." Ida's smile tightened. "I'm only trying to help you fit in, honey. This is a small church, small town. I wouldn't want anyone to make you feel uncomfortable." After she left, Raven stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. "Should I change it?" "No," I said firmly. "You look perfect, but the damage was done. That seed of doubt had been planted. The suggestion that Raven needed to make herself smaller, more palatable, less visibly herself to be acceptable in my parents' world. It wouldn't be the last time. My father never raised his voice. He never said anything you could point to as definitively prejudiced. That was his special skill, maintaining plausible deniability while making his feelings perfectly clear. He'd come home from the hardware store and talk about his day at dinner, telling stories about difficult customers and supply chain problems. "Had this guy come in today complaining that everything's offensive now," he'd say, shaking his head. "Can't even give honest feedback without someone making it personal. Whatever happened to just treating everybody the same?" He never looked at Raven when he said these things, but we all knew who the comments were aimed at. He'd refer to her as that girl when talking to my mother. Did that girl eat already? Or is that girl gonna need a ride somewhere? Never Raven, never my wife, never his daughter-in-law. When Raven thanked them for letting us stay, he'd wave his hand dismissively. "Well, you should be grateful. Not everybody would open their home like this, especially with times being what they are." The implication hung in the air. We were doing her a favor she didn't quite deserve. The worst part was his silence when my mother's comments got sharper. He'd just keep eating, keep watching television, keep existing in this bubble where he could claim he wasn't part of the problem, because he wasn't actively saying the cruel things out loud. His passivity was its own form of cruelty. I wish I could tell you I stood up for Raven every single time. I wish I could say I called out every backhanded comment, every dismissive gesture, every moment my parents made my wife feel less than welcome in what was supposed to be our temporary home. But I didn't. I told myself I'd say something later, when the moment was right, when we weren't so dependent on their help, when I could afford to risk the confrontation. After my mother's comment about Raven's hair, I waited until we were alone and said, "You know she didn't mean anything by it." Even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were a betrayal. When my father called her that girl at dinner, I stayed quiet and passed the salt. When my mother suggested Raven's prenatal vitamins were probably unnecessary, women had babies just fine before all these modern supplements, I changed the subject instead of defending my wife's choices. I was living in this constant state of internal conflict, knowing I was letting small injustices slide because we needed the free rent, because I didn't want to start drama, because some cowardly part of me still wanted my parents' approval even as I watched them disrespect the woman I loved. Every silence was a choice. Every rationalization was a betrayal. And Raven noticed every single one. I'd catch Raven sitting on the edge of our bed in the middle of the day, just staring at the wall with her hands resting on her growing belly. The vibrant woman who'd challenged me in the library, who'd made me laugh at bus stops, who'd kissed me under city lights. She was fading into someone quieter, smaller, more careful. She moved through my parents' house like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome, always asking permission to use the kitchen, always cleaning up immediately after herself, erasing any evidence she'd been there, always dressing in the most conservative clothes she owned, as if she could somehow make herself acceptable through perfect behavior. "They resent me," she said one night as we lay in the dark. "They resent that I'm here, that I'm different from what they expected, that they don't know where I came from or who my father is. They look at me and see someone who trapped their son. That's not true. Talon, don't. Don't defend them when we both know what's happening." She was right, and my inability to fully acknowledge the truth was creating a distance between us that felt wider than the few inches separating us in that cramped bed. 3 weeks into living at my parents' house, on a night when sleep wouldn't come, and the weight of everything felt unbearable, Raven finally told me the truth she'd been carrying alone. "There's something I need to tell you about my father," she said into the darkness. I turned to face her, her profile barely visible in the moonlight filtering through the curtains. "His name is Maxwell Cross. He's not just absent, he's a billionaire. He owns Cross Industries, a conglomerate worth billions. Real estate, tech investments, manufacturing. My mother worked as a secretary at one of his smaller companies when they met. He was already married to someone his family had chosen, someone from the right background with the right connections." My breath caught. "Raven, they had an affair. She got pregnant with me. He wanted to leave his wife, wanted to start over with my mom, but his family threatened to disown him, to destroy her, to make sure she never worked anywhere again. So he made a choice. He stayed in his world, and my mom raised me alone in ours." She pulled an envelope from the nightstand drawer, hands shaking slightly. "He sent this 6 months ago, right before my mom died. His lawyer tracked me down. He wants to meet me. He's offering financial support, a relationship, everything he should have given me from the beginning." The letter inside was typed on expensive letterhead, offering an allowance that would have solved every financial problem we had. A trust fund, an inheritance, a father who suddenly wanted to claim the daughter he'd abandoned. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked quietly. "Because I didn't want you to think I was keeping secrets, and I didn't want his money to be part of why you chose me," Raven said, tears sliding down her cheeks. "My whole life, I watched my mom struggle because she refused to take anything from a man who was too ashamed to claim us publicly. She had her pride, and she taught me that self-respect matters more than comfort. The hurt was there, that she'd carried this alone while we struggled to pay rent, while we moved into my parents' house out of desperation. But underneath the hurt was understanding. "I get it," I said, pulling her closer. "I get why you didn't tell me. And I don't care about the money, Raven. I care that you've been suffering out of pride when you didn't have to. It's not just pride. It's a principle. He doesn't get to be a father when it's convenient, when I'm grown and don't need him anymore. What if we do need him, though? What if staying here, dealing with my parents' disrespect, is worse than accepting help from yours?" She was quiet for a long time. I made myself a promise. I'd only reach out to Maxwell Cross if it became truly dangerous, if our baby was at risk, if we had absolutely no other choice. "Okay," I said. Then we agreed, only if it becomes life or death, lying there in the dark, holding my wife while she cried quietly against my chest. I understood something fundamental about secrets. They're not always about deceit. Sometimes they're about survival. Sometimes they're about protecting yourself from being reduced to your circumstances or your bloodline. Sometimes they're about refusing to let money or connection define your worth. Raven had spent her entire life watching people make assumptions about her because she was raised by a single mother, because she didn't have a father's name to legitimize her existence, because she had to work 3 times as hard for half as much. The secret of Maxwell Cross's billions wasn't about hiding wealth. It was about proving she could build a life without it. I made a resolution right then, holding her in that cramped bedroom that smelled like old wood and new baby clothes. I would be the safe place where her whole truth could exist, where she didn't have to hide or shrink or apologize for the complexity of who she was and where she came from. I would be better than my parents, better than her father, better than the version of myself who'd been choosing silence over courage. That resolution would be tested much sooner than I expected, and I would fail in ways that still haunt me. Sunday morning at 6:30, 5 weeks before Raven's due date, I woke to her gripping my arm hard enough to leave marks. "Something's wrong," she whispered, her face pale in the early light. "Talon, something's really wrong." Before I could fully process what she was saying, I felt the wetness soaking through the sheets. Her water had broken, weeks too early, and the look of fear in her eyes mirrored the terror racing through my chest. I shouted for my parents, my voice cracking with panic. Within seconds, my father appeared in the doorway in his bathrobe, instantly alert. "Her water broke," I managed. "The baby's coming." Whatever tension had been building in that house evaporated in the face of a medical emergency. My mother grabbed her keys while my father helped me get Raven to the car, all of us moving with the singular focus of getting her to the hospital before it was too late. The emergency room became a chaos of monitors beeping, nurses asking rapid-fire questions, and doctors examining Raven with concerned expressions that made my stomach drop. "The baby's heart rates are irregular," a doctor with kind eyes and graying hair explained. "We need to do an emergency C-section. Right now." "Babies?" I repeated, the word not making sense at first. "Yes, twins. You didn't know?" The doctor looked surprised. "The ultrasound shows 2 distinct heartbeats. They're in distress and we need to move quickly." "But it's too early," Raven said, her voice breaking. "They're not ready. They're safer outside than at this point. We've got an excellent NICU team standing by." They wheeled her away before I could fully say goodbye, and I stood in that sterile hallway feeling more helpless than I'd ever felt in my life. My parents sat in the waiting room chairs, my mother clutching her purse, my father staring at the wall with an unreadable expression. 47 minutes later, I counted every single one. A nurse came out smiling. "You have a son and a daughter. They're small but fighting. You can see them in a few minutes." Cairo Croswell came into the world weighing 4 pounds 2 ounces. Nia Croswell followed 3 minutes later at 4 pounds even. Tiny, fragile, covered in wires and monitors, but alive and breathing, and absolutely perfect. 2 days in the hospital felt like 2 years. Raven recovered from the surgery in a haze of pain medication and exhaustion, learning to breastfeed twins who were barely strong enough to latch. The NICU nurses taught us how to hold them despite all the wires, how to change diapers smaller than my hand, and how to recognize the signs of distress. When the doctors finally cleared us to take them home, with strict instructions for Raven to rest completely and avoid any stress, relief and dread hit me simultaneously. We pulled into my parents' driveway at dusk on a Wednesday evening, the sky bruised purple and orange. My mother stood on the porch, arms crossed, her expression not quite matching the smile she was attempting. My father's truck sat in the driveway, meaning he'd left the hardware store early. The air felt heavy with something I couldn't name yet, but should have recognized as danger. We hadn't even made it fully inside before my father started. "We need to talk about the hospital bills," Clint said, blocking the doorway. "Emergency C-section. 2 days in NICU, all those specialists. That's not going to be cheap. Who's paying for that? The hospital gave us paperwork for payment plans, I said, trying to maneuver past him with the car seat holding Cairo. We'll figure it out. Figure it out how? My mother demanded, her voice sharp. You're barely keeping up with your share of groceries. Now you've got medical debt on top of everything else. How exactly do you plan to handle that under our roof? Raven stood behind me, still moving slowly from the surgery, holding Nia against her chest. There's a lawyer who handles things for my father, she said quietly. He said to contact him if we needed help with medical expenses. The room went absolutely silent. Your father, Ida repeated, her eyes narrowing. The father who wasn't in the picture, the one you said abandoned you, suddenly he's got lawyers handling medical bills. It's complicated, Raven said, exhaustion making her words slow. He's wanted to help for years, but my mother refused. How convenient, my mother interrupted. All this time you've been playing the poor, struggling girl with no family, and you've got a father with money. What else have you been lying about? I haven't been lying about anything. I told you my father wasn't part of my life. That's still true, but he has resources, Clint said, stepping closer. Resources you've been hiding while living rent-free in our house, eating our food, using our utilities. We didn't know we'd need help until you trapped our son with a pregnancy and moved yourself in here as a backup plan? Ida's voice dripped with venom. Is that it? Keep the rich daddy's secret while you milk us for everything we've got. What happened next broke something in me that has never fully healed. My mother looked at Raven, at my wife, who had given birth to her grandchildren 48 hours earlier, whose body was still healing from major surgery, who stood there holding our infant daughter, and said the words, I'll never forgive. How do we even know those babies are really Talon's? You've been keeping secrets about rich fathers and lawyers. What else are you keeping secret? Maybe you saw my son as an easy target, someone grateful enough for attention that he wouldn't ask questions. The accusation of infidelity hung in the air like poison gas. Raven's face went completely blank, shock rendering her speechless. And my father who claimed to be a man of God, who preached about family values and Christian charity, stood there in his corner of the living room and said absolutely nothing. His silence was agreement. His passivity was participation. Something inside me finally snapped. Don't you dare, I said, my voice low and shaking with rage. Don't you dare question whether my children are mine. Don't you dare accuse my wife of anything when the only people in this room who've been dishonest are the two of you. Talon, we're just trying to protect you. Protect me from what, Mom? From the woman I love? From my own family? You've done nothing but disrespect Raven since the day I brought her home. Every comment about her hair, her clothes, the way she talks, the fact that her father wasn't around. It's all been about one thing. She's different from what you expected, and you can't stand it. That's not fair, Ida protested. It's completely fair. You're acting exactly like the rich family that rejected Raven's mother. The family that thought Angela Cross wasn't good enough because of her background. You're doing the same thing, just from a different tax bracket. You're ashamed that your grandchildren aren't what you pictured. Admit it. My father's continued silence was enough. My mother's face transformed into something I'd never seen before, pure cold rage mixed with self-righteous indignation. If that's what you think of us, she said, her voice like ice, then you need to leave. Take that girl and those babies and get out of my house. Tonight. Right now. Mom. I said get out, Talon. I will not be accused of prejudice in my own home by my own son. I will not have my generosity thrown back in my face. You made your choice when you married her. Now live with it somewhere else. I looked at my father, waiting for him to intervene, to be the voice of reason, to do something other than stand there like a statue. He turned away, walking toward the kitchen without a word. Raven touched my arm gently. "Let's just go," she whispered. "Please, let's just go." I moved through that house in a daze, throwing our belongings into the same duffel bags we'd brought just weeks earlier. Baby clothes, diapers, the few toys people had given us at a tiny shower Raven's co-workers had thrown. Everything we owned in the world fit into 2 bags and a diaper bag. Raven changed the twins into warmer sleepers with shaking hands, her face wet with silent tears. I could see her wincing with every movement, the C-section incision still so fresh that bending was agony. I carried our bags to the porch, then came back for Cairo's car seat while Raven followed slowly with Nia. The night air was cold for June, and I could hear both babies starting to fuss, sensing their mother's distress. The door locked behind us with a click that sounded like the end of everything I'd known. My childhood, my parents' love, the belief that family was supposed to be unconditional, all of it died in that single metallic sound. I need to stop right here and ask you something directly, because what happened on that porch is something I still wrestle with years later. Do you think I should ever forgive my parents for this? For throwing out a woman who just had surgery, for putting their own pride above the safety of their newborn grandchildren, for choosing judgment over love? Drop your honest opinion in the comments right now. Is blood thicker than respect? Does being family give someone the right to treat you terribly and still expect forgiveness? I genuinely want to know what you think. And if you believe no mother and no newborn babies should ever be thrown out like garbage, share this video right now. Share it so more people understand what happens when prejudice lives in the same house as unconditional love used to. Subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories if you haven't already, because what happens next, when that Rolls-Royce pulls into the driveway, you absolutely cannot miss it. Hit that notification bell, so you're here for every second of what comes next. I stood on that porch holding Nia, her tiny body warm against my chest, her face scrunched up in the beginning stages of crying. Raven sat on the porch steps cradling Cairo, moving carefully because every position hurt her healing body. Our bags sat beside us like we were refugees, which in a way we were. I had $63 in my wallet, a quarter tank of gas, and absolutely no plan beyond getting my family somewhere safe and warm. That's when I heard it. The sound of an engine that didn't belong on this rural Ohio road. Smooth, expensive, purring like a satisfied cat. Headlights swept across the gravel driveway, and a vehicle emerged from the darkness that looked like it had driven straight out of another universe. A black Rolls-Royce, gleaming even in the dim light, glided to a stop 20 feet from where we stood with our entire world falling apart. The driver emerged first, a professional-looking man in a dark suit who moved with military precision. He walked around the vehicle and opened the rear passenger door with practiced smoothness. Then Maxwell Cross stepped out into the Ohio night. He was tall, probably 6'2", with shoulders that suggested he still worked out despite being in his late 50s. His charcoal suit probably cost more than my truck, perfectly tailored to his frame. Silver threaded through his close-cropped hair at the temples, giving him a distinguished appearance that commanded respect without demanding it. But what struck me most was his face when his eyes found Raven and the twins. All that controlled corporate power softened instantly into something vulnerable and almost desperate. This wasn't a billionaire arriving at a business meeting. This was a father seeing his daughter and grandchildren for what I suspected was the first time in person. He moved toward us with purpose, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel. "Daddy?" Raven's voice came out small and broken, barely more than a whisper. It was the first time I'd ever heard her call him that. In all our conversations about Maxwell Cross, she'd referred to him as my father, or that man, or Maxwell, never with the intimate simplicity of Daddy. Maxwell's stride faltered for half a step, and I saw his jaw tighten with emotion he was clearly fighting to control. His eyes swept over Raven, taking in details I knew he was cataloguing with horror. The hospital bracelet still on her wrist, the way she held herself carefully because every movement hurt, the exhaustion carved into her face, the two tiny infants we clutched against the cold. "I came for my grandbabies," he said, his voice resonant and steady despite the emotion underneath. "And for my daughter." He knelt on the gravel in his expensive suit, not caring about the dirt, and looked up at Raven with tears in his eyes. Maxwell's grief and guilt lasted only seconds before shifting into something else. Controlled urgency focused entirely on practical safety. "How long has it been since your surgery?" he asked Raven, his tone clinical. 2 days, she whispered, "and they have you standing on a porch in the cold. Are you insane?" The last question wasn't directed at Raven, but at the house behind us. He stood, immediately removing his suit jacket and draping it around her shoulders. "You should be in bed, elevated, with ice packs and pain medication." He turned to me, assessing me with sharp eyes. "You're Talon. Where's your car? What's your plan for tonight?" The honesty felt like failure. "My truck, and I don't have a plan yet. I was going to find a motel, but I need to make sure it's clean enough and—" "No," Maxwell interrupted firmly. "You're coming with me, all of you, right now. This isn't a debate." That's when the front door opened wider. My mother had been watching from the window, I realized. She stepped onto the porch, her eyes going from the Rolls-Royce to Maxwell's suit to his face, and I watched recognition dawn across her features. "Maxwell Cross," she said, her voice completely different from the cold rage she'd used 20 minutes earlier. "The Maxwell Cross? From Cross Industries?" She'd seen him on local news when his company opened a distribution center 2 counties over, seen his face on the business section when he donated to the new children's hospital. Now here he stood in her driveway, and suddenly everything about her demeanor shifted. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding," she stammered, smoothing her hair. "This is just a family disagreement that got out of hand. I'm sure we can all go inside and—" My father appeared behind her, equally flustered, trying to smile. Maxwell's expression didn't change. He didn't return my mother's sudden warmth or acknowledge my father's attempt at friendliness. He just looked at them with the kind of cold assessment that probably made corporate executives sweat in boardrooms. "A family disagreement," he repeated slowly. "Is that what you call throwing a woman who had major surgery 48 hours ago out of your house? A woman holding premature newborns in the cold night air? That's your definition of a disagreement?" "Now hold on," my father started, his voice taking on that defensive edge. "We didn't throw anybody." I watched from down the road, Maxwell interrupted calmly. "I saw bags on the porch. I saw my daughter struggling to walk. I saw 2 infants who should be in a temperature-controlled environment being exposed to whatever elements you deemed appropriate for your righteous anger. So please don't insult my intelligence by pretending this was anything other than exactly what it looks like." Maxwell took a step closer to the porch, and despite being outnumbered, despite standing in their yard, he somehow made my parents look small. "I've spent 30 years in business," he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "I've dealt with people at every level of society, billionaires, executives, janitors, line workers, everyone in between. And you want to know what I've learned? How someone treats people who can't offer them anything in return tells you everything about their character." He gestured toward Raven. "When you thought my daughter had no family, no money, no powerful connections, you treated her like she was disposable. Now that you know who I am, I can see the calculations happening behind your eyes. Suddenly you want to talk things through. Suddenly it's all a misunderstanding." His voice hardened. "A last name or a bank balance shouldn't change basic human decency. The fact that it does for you tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Then Maxwell turned to me, and I braced myself for judgment I probably deserved. "Raven's told me about you. he said, his tone less harsh but still assessing. She said you work hard, that you stood by her when it would have been easier not to, that you're trying to be different from how you were raised. I nodded, my throat tight. I haven't been perfect, sir. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken up. I let things slide because we needed help, and I was afraid of making things worse. But you walked out with her tonight, Maxwell observed. When it came down to choosing between your parents' approval and your wife's safety, you chose her. I should have chosen her sooner. More clearly, I should have. Should-haves don't matter now, he interrupted. What matters is what you do next. My daughter needs a partner who will stand up when it's hard, not just when it's convenient. Can you be that? Yes, sir. Maxwell glanced back at the Rolls-Royce, then at Raven and the twins, then at me. Here's what's going to happen, he said with the calm authority of someone used to making decisions worth millions. Raven, my grandchildren are coming with me. That's not negotiable. They need proper medical support, rest, and safety. He paused, looking directly at me. You're welcome to come if you understand that from this moment forward, they come first. Not your parents' feelings, not your hometown loyalty, not your nostalgia for what used to be. Them. Always. Behind me I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath. Talon, honey, Ida said, her voice syrupy with manipulation. Don't let him turn you against your family. This is your home. These are your parents. We raised you. We love you. I stood between two worlds, literally caught between the porch and the Rolls-Royce. I looked at my mother standing on that porch, at my father beside her with his hands in his pockets, at the house where I'd spent my entire childhood. Then I looked at Raven, barely able to stand, holding our daughter. Cairo is sleeping in my arms, completely dependent on me to protect him. In life we were trying to build against impossible odds. Home isn't a place, I said quietly, turning to face my parents fully. Home is where people protect you, not where they throw you out because you don't match their expectations. Talon. I don't want things to be the same, Mum. I want better for my children. I want them to grow up knowing that love doesn't come with conditions about appearance or background, or who's worthy of respect. I adjusted Cairo in my arms and walked toward the Rolls-Royce, each step away from that porch feeling like cutting chains I'd been carrying my whole life. If you get in that car, my mother called out, her voice shaking with rage and something that might have been grief. Nothing will ever be the same between us. You walk away now, and you're choosing them over your own blood. I stopped at the car door, Maxwell's driver already helping Raven into the back seat with careful attention to her surgical incision. You're right, I said, turning back one last time. Nothing will be the same, because I don't want the same. If the same means watching you disrespect my wife, if it means raising my kids around people who think love should have boundaries based on appearance and background, if it means being the kind of man who stays silent when cruelty is happening in front of him, then I don't want any part of the same. I got into the car. The door closed with a solid final sound that felt like the end of one life and the terrifying beginning of another. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to ask you something. What would you have done in my place? Would you have gotten in that car and driven away from the only family you'd ever known? Would you have chosen the person you love over the people who raised you, even knowing there might be no coming back from that choice? Comment right now with your honest answer. I'm not looking for the right response. I want to know what you would have actually done if you were standing in that driveway with your whole world breaking apart. And if you're still watching, if this story has grabbed hold of you and won't let go, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about choosing courage over comfort. Subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories, because what happens after I get in that Rolls-Royce, the conversation with Maxwell, the choices we had to make, and the surprising place this story ends up, you absolutely cannot miss it. The drive from my parents' house to Maxwell Cross's estate took 40 minutes, most of it in stunned silence. Raven dozed against my shoulder, exhausted from pain and emotional devastation. The twins slept in specialized car seats that Maxwell's driver had somehow already installed perfectly. We turned off the main highway onto a private road lined with old oak trees, their branches forming a canopy overhead. The driveway stretched for what felt like half a mile before the house came into view. I'd expected something ostentatious, marble columns, gold fixtures, the kind of wealth that screams for attention. Instead, the Cross estate was large but understated, a sprawling stone and timber home that looked like it had grown organically from the landscape rather than being imposed upon it. Carefully maintained gardens flanked the circular drive. Warm light glowed from tall windows. The car stopped at the front entrance, and staff appeared immediately, not servants in uniforms but professionals who greeted Maxwell with genuine warmth and respect. "This is my daughter Raven," Maxwell said simply, helping her from the car, "and my grandchildren Cairo and Nia, and this is Talon, my son-in-law. They'll be staying with us. Please make sure they have everything they need." No explanation, no apology for the late hour, just family coming home. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and efficient movements stepped forward. "I am Ingrid Morales," she said, speaking directly to Raven. "I manage the household. Mr. Cross had me prepare the East Wing guest suite and the nursery next door. Let's get you settled so you can rest." Maxwell had been preparing for this. For months, apparently. Just in case Raven ever needed him. The guest suite was larger than the entire apartment Raven and I had shared, a king bed with what looked like hotel-quality linens, an attached bathroom with a soaking tub, through a connecting door, a fully equipped nursery with 2 cribs, a changing table, a rocking chair positioned near the window, and shelves stocked with diapers, wipes, and more baby supplies than I'd ever seen in one place. "Mr. Cross wanted to be ready," Ingrid explained quietly, noting my shocked expression. "He's been hoping for this moment since he learned about the pregnancy." Within an hour, a doctor arrived. Dr. Samuel Price, who Maxwell introduced as his personal physician and a friend. He examined Raven's incision with gentle competence, asked detailed questions about her pain levels, and adjusted her medication. "You're healing well," he told her, "but you need complete rest for at least 2 weeks. No stairs, no lifting anything heavier than the babies, and someone checking on you regularly." He turned to examine Cairo and Nia with the same thoroughness, pronouncing them small but healthy. After everyone settled for the night, Raven finally sleeping without pain creasing her forehead, the twins in their cribs with a monitor that probably cost more than my monthly salary, I found myself standing on the balcony outside our suite, staring at grounds that stretched beyond what I could see in the darkness. 6 hours ago, we'd been homeless with 2 newborns and nowhere to go. Now we were in a mansion with staff and a personal physician and nursery furniture that looked like it came from magazines. The contrast was so sharp it didn't feel real. I'd never been around wealth like this. The nicest place I'd ever stayed was a Holiday Inn on a high school band trip. I didn't know the rules here, didn't know how to act or what was expected, or whether accepting all this help made me less of a man somehow. My father's voice echoed in my head, "You can't start a life of love alone." He'd been wrong about Raven, wrong about our relationship, but was he right that I couldn't provide for my family on my own? The shame of that thought burned. "Chamomile tea," Maxwell's voice came from behind me. "Ingrid swears it helps with the kind of thinking that keeps you awake at 3 in the morning." He handed me a ceramic mug and leaned against the balcony railing beside me, close but not crowding. "Thank you," I said, the words feeling insufficient for everything he'd done in the past few hours. "For all of this, for coming when you did, for—" "Don't," he interrupted gently. "Don't thank me for doing what I should have done 24 years ago when Angela told me she was pregnant." The silence stretched between us, filled with regret so heavy I could almost touch it. I was a coward, Maxwell continued, staring out at the darkness. My parents told me that marrying Angela would destroy everything they'd built, that our family reputation couldn't survive me choosing a secretary over the daughter of their business partner. They made it sound like protecting the family legacy was the noble choice. He laughed bitterly. I convinced myself that leaving Angela was protecting her too, that she'd be better off without the pressure and judgment my world would put on her, that loving her meant setting her free. But really, I said quietly, you were just protecting yourself from having to be uncomfortable. Maxwell turned to look at me, something like respect crossing his face. Yes, that's exactly what I was doing. And I missed everything. Her first steps, her first words, every birthday, every struggle. I built an empire but lost my daughter. Maxwell set down his tea and turned to face me directly. I'm not going to make the same mistake with my grandchildren, he said, which means I need to talk to you about something important. I braced myself, unsure what was coming. I'm offering you a job at one of my companies, not a handout, and not some made-up position where you collect a paycheck for showing up. A real job with real expectations and real consequences if you don't perform. Sir, I don't have experience in. You have a business management degree, you're 3 credits from finishing. You're willing to work multiple jobs to support your family. You understand construction and repair from your father's business. That's more than most of the entitled graduates I interview who think a degree means they shouldn't have to start at the bottom. He leaned against the railing. I'm offering you an opportunity tied to responsibility, not entitlement. You'll start in project management at the distribution center, learning how the operation works from the ground up. If you prove yourself, you advance. If you coast on being my son-in-law, you'll be gone within 6 months. Why would you take that risk on me? Because Raven chose you, and because you got in the car tonight when it would have been easier to stay. Maxwell's words hit something deep inside me. That place where I'd been carrying shame about needing help mixed with anger at myself for staying silent for so long in my parents' house. I have habits I need to break, I admitted. I learned to keep the peace by staying quiet, to avoid confrontation even when confrontation was necessary. I watched my parents disrespect Raven for weeks and only spoke up when they went too far. That pattern, Maxwell said carefully, is what I'm asking you to break. Not just for Raven's sake, but for your children. Cairo and Nia are going to grow up in a world that will have opinions about their mixed heritage, about their family structure, about who they are, and what they're allowed to become. He met my eyes directly. They need a father who will speak up before things reach a breaking point, who will confront disrespect the first time it appears, not the 10th, who protects peace by addressing problems, not by pretending they don't exist. How do I know when to speak up versus when to let something go? Ask yourself a simple question. Am I protecting actual peace, or am I just protecting my own comfort? If it's the latter, speak up. The clarity of that distinction settled something in my chest. Over the next few days, while Raven recovered, and the twins established their eating and sleeping patterns, I watched father and daughter begin the slow work of building something from nothing. It started with small conversations. Maxwell would sit in the nursery while Raven fed the babies, and they'd talk about safe things first: the weather, the twins' features, the quality of the hospital care she'd received. Then one afternoon, Maxwell brought out old photographs of Angela. "Your mother was the most alive person I've ever known," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She laughed with her whole body. She could find joy in a sunset or a good cup of coffee. She made everything feel possible. Raven's hands trembled as she looked at pictures of her mother, young and vibrant, before years of struggle had worn her down. You took that from her. You took her joy and her possibilities, and you left her to struggle alone. Maxwell didn't defend himself or make excuses. Yes, I did. and I will carry that guilt until the day I die. Your mother deserved better. You deserved better. I can't give you back what I took, Raven, but I can be present now if you'll allow it." "Why now?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "Why was watching me struggle okay until I had babies? Why wasn't I enough on my own?" The answer to that question took days of conversation, tears, and brutal honesty. But slowly, carefully, trust began forming in the spaces where only hurt had existed before. I'd find Maxwell standing at the nursery door at odd hours, just watching Cairo and Nia sleep. His face would carry this expression of wonder mixed with grief, joy at what he had now, sorrow for everything he'd missed with Raven. One morning I walked in to find him holding Nia, singing softly in a language I didn't recognize. "My grandmother used to sing this to me," he explained quietly. "I wanted someone in this family to remember it." Raven began resting without the constant tension that had marked our time at my parents' house. She'd sleep for hours without jolting awake, worried about saying the wrong thing or being in the wrong place. Her body started healing properly because the stress wasn't fighting against the recovery. And I spent hours in that nursery, holding my children and making promises about the kind of father I'd be, the kind who spoke up, who protected, who chose courage over comfort every single time. 6 months passed like a deep breath I'd been holding finally released. Cairo and Nia grew stronger every day, their tiny, premature bodies filling out into healthy, alert babies who smiled at familiar faces and tracked movement with curious eyes. Cairo had my nose and Raven's expressive eyebrows. Nia had Raven's cheekbones and what Maxwell swore were his mother's eyes. Raven healed. Not just physically, though the C-section scar faded to a thin silver line, but emotionally. The constant tension she'd carried at my parents' house slowly unwound. She laughed more easily. She moved through Maxwell's home, our home now, without apologizing for taking up space. I started working at Cross Distribution Solutions in their project management training program. Entry level, just like Maxwell promised. I shadowed senior managers, learned logistics software, and worked overtime when shipments ran behind schedule. Nobody gave me special treatment because I'd married the boss's daughter. In fact, I think they held me to higher standards specifically because of that connection. My first performance review praised my work ethic, but noted I needed to be more assertive in meetings. "Stop waiting for permission to share good ideas," my supervisor wrote. It was the same lesson Maxwell had given me on the balcony, coming from a different angle. I was learning to find my voice. 4 months after that night on the porch, I sat down at the desk in our suite and wrote a letter to my parents. I revised it 7 times before getting it right. Firm but not cruel, clear but not closed off completely. "Dear Mom and Dad, I've spent these months thinking about the night you asked us to leave. I've worked through anger, hurt, and grief for the relationship I thought we had. You raised me to believe family was sacred, that loyalty mattered above everything. You taught me to work hard and keep my word. Those lessons shaped who I am, and I'm grateful for them. But what happened that night was wrong. Throwing Raven out while she was still healing from surgery, putting our newborn babies at risk because your pride mattered more than their safety, that wasn't a mistake in the heat of the moment. That was a choice that revealed what you value most. If you want a relationship with Cairo and Nia, these are the boundaries. You will treat Raven with respect. No more coded comments about her hair, her background, or her father. No more treating her like she's lucky we took her in. No more pretending your issues with her are about anything other than the fact that she's different from what you expected. Love without respect is not the environment my children will grow up in. Not anymore. Your son, Talon. 3 weeks of silence followed. Then a letter arrived in my father's careful handwriting. "Talon, we didn't raise you to talk back to your parents. But maybe we should have raised you to speak up more. Maybe that's part of what went wrong. Your mother cries sometimes when she thinks about that night. She won't admit it, But I hear her. She's not good at saying she was wrong about things. Neither am I, if I'm being honest. We're not ready to say everything you probably want us to say. We're still working through our own feelings about choices you've made and how things turned out. But we don't want to lose you completely. We don't want to be strangers to our grandchildren. Would it be possible to meet Cairo and Nia someday? Not right away if you're not ready, but someday. We'd like to try to do better, even if we don't fully understand everything yet. Dad, it wasn't an apology. It wasn't an acknowledgement of the prejudice that had driven their cruelty. It was imperfect, cautious, and frustratingly vague. But it was something, a crack in the wall, a possibility that maybe, with time and consistent changed behavior, something could be rebuilt that looked different from what had broken. I showed Raven the letter that evening while the twins napped. She read it slowly, her expression unreadable, then handed it back without comment. "What do you think?" I asked carefully. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at Nia sleeping in her crib. "I think there's a difference between forgiveness and reconciliation," she finally said. "Forgiveness is something I can do on my own, for my own peace. It's letting go of the anger that hurts me more than it hurts them. But reconciliation requires two people. It requires them to actually change, not just feel bad about the consequences. So you're saying—" "I'm saying I'm open to someday," Raven continued. "But someday means after they've proven through consistent actions that they respect me as a person, not just tolerate me because I'm connected to their grandchildren. It means after they've done the work to understand why what they did was wrong, not just that it had results they didn't like." She met my eyes directly. "I won't rush back into harm just because they're sad about losing access to us. That's not forgiveness. That's just accepting abuse with better manners." I'd never loved her more than in that moment of clarity. Late that night, unable to sleep, I found myself thinking about that cold February evening when everything fell apart. For months I'd remembered it as the worst night of my life. The shame of being homeless with newborns, the terror of not knowing how to protect my family, the grief of losing my parents' love. But now, with distance and perspective, I understood it differently. That night on the porch was the death of one version of myself, the version who chose family comfort over justice, the version who stayed quiet to keep the peace even when the peace was built on disrespect, the version who believed blood relationship automatically meant unconditional loyalty regardless of how people treated each other. That version of Talon Croswell died on that porch, and something better was born in the back seat of Maxwell Cross's Rolls-Royce. The man who got into that car made a choice to protect the vulnerable over protecting his own comfort, to choose the family he was building over the family that was breaking him, to walk into uncertainty with courage instead of staying in cruelty with familiarity. That choice changed everything, not just that night, but every day since. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, you deserve to know what I learned, not as abstract concepts, but as hard truths that cost me everything to understand. First, love without courage is fragile. My parents said they loved me, but their love couldn't survive the test of me choosing differently than they wanted. Real love requires the courage to accept people as they are, not as you wish they would be. Second, blood is not a free pass to disrespect. Family is defined by how people treat you when you're vulnerable, not by shared DNA. The people who held me when I was breaking weren't the ones who raised me. They were the ones who chose to show up with respect and support when I had nothing to offer them in return. Third, second chances are powerful but not automatic. My parents might earn their way back into our lives through consistent changed behavior, or they might not. Either way, second chances have to be chosen and backed by real action, not just words that sound good. Fourth, money reveals character. My parents treated Raven one way when they thought she was poor and powerless, then completely differently when Maxwell's Rolls-Royce appeared. That contrast showed their true values more clearly than anything they'd ever said about family or faith. Fifth, real strength isn't never needing help. Real strength is choosing the right help and rejecting toxic help even when you're desperate. I think about Cairo and Nia's future constantly now. They're too young to remember that night on the porch, too young to understand the complexity of what happened between their parents and grandparents. But someday they'll ask questions. They'll want to know why they don't see my parents often, or why there's tension at family gatherings, or why their mom sometimes gets quiet when certain topics come up. When that day comes, I want to tell them the truth, that their parents chose their dignity over comfort, that we walked away from people who couldn't see our worth because staying would have taught you that love means accepting disrespect. I want them to grow up seeing their father stand up for their mother, seeing their mother set boundaries that protect her peace, seeing their grandfather work every day to be present in ways he failed to be for their mom. I want them to learn that you never have to stay where your dignity is disposable, no matter who's doing the disposing. And I want them to know that second chances are beautiful when they're genuine and dangerous when they're not. If this story reached something in you, if you saw your own family in these moments, if you've ever had to choose between the people who raised you and the person you love, if you've ever felt thrown away by the ones who were supposed to protect you, share this video right now. Share it so it reaches someone who needs the courage to walk away from toxic love. Someone who needs permission to choose differently. Someone who's standing on their own porch trying to decide which direction to walk. Comment below and tell me which lesson hit you the hardest. What part of this story made you feel seen or understood or less alone in your own struggle? Thank you for helping Mr. Steele Rich Stories pass 2,500 subscribers. Your support turns painful experiences into powerful lessons that can change lives. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story of real-life struggle, courage, and redemption. Because these stories matter. Your story matters, and together we're building something that helps people choose better, love braver, and live with the dignity everyone deserves. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being part of this community that believes people are worth more than the worst moments of their lives, and that second chances, when they're real, can heal generations of hurt.